3 years ago, Volodymyr Zelenskyy was the face of defiance. The Ukrainian president, once a comedian turned wartime leader, became the embodiment of resistance against Russia. World leaders lined up to shake his hands. Weapons and aid flowed into Ukraine, and his speeches electrified parliaments across the globe. Today, however, the picture is starkly different. Zelenskyy is facing what may be his most challenging battle yet, not against Russia, but against waning global support and shifting political alliances. With US President Donald Trump aligning with Moscow at the United Nations, could this be the beginning of the end for Zelenskyy? Hello and welcome. You're watching Statecraft with me, Geeta Mohan. In February 2022, when Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, Zelenskyy refused to flee. He said, and I quote, "I need ammunition, not a ride," rallying his nation and the world in one voice. Western leaders responded with unprecedented sanctions against Russia and billions in military aid for Ukraine. The narrative was clear. Zelenskyy was a hero, and Ukraine's fight was a fight for democracy itself. However, 3 years later, that support is fractured. The war is grinding on with no clear victory in sight, and in Washington, D.C., a major political shift is underway. Donald Trump, now back in the White House, has not only refused to call Vladimir Putin a dictator, but has also made it clear that he does not see Ukraine as an American priority. Since returning to power, Trump has taken a more aggressive stance on Ukraine than even his first term suggested. He has openly criticized Zelenskyy, calling him a dictator without elections, a reference to Ukraine's postponed elections due to martial law. Trump has repeatedly stated that Zelenskyy must make a deal with Russia, hinting that continued US support could be conditional on Ukraine conceding territory. More alarming for Kyiv is Trump's increasing warmth towards Putin. At the United Nations, the US voted against a resolution condemning Russia's invasion, breaking away from its European allies and from its own voting pattern of the past. Instead, the US pushed for its own resolution, one that made no mention of Russian aggression and simply urged a swift end to the conflict. For Ukraine, no doubt, this was a red flag.
Mr. President, the United States urges member states to vote no on the European Union and Russian Federation amendments to the US draft resolution. We cannot support them. These amendments pursue a war of words rather than an end to the war. The attempt to add this language detracts from what we are trying to achieve with this forward-looking resolution. A firm consensus from the members of this body to unite behind a resolution calling for the end to this conflict. We urge other members to join us in rejecting these amendments as we work toward the goal of building a lasting peace between Ukraine and Russia.
Meanwhile, the US drafted resolution, ever so different on Russia from its earlier stated policy, exposed a widening policy gap between Washington and Kyiv. Then came France's surprising intervention. In a last-minute move, France proposed amendments that called out Russia's full-scale invasion and reaffirmed Ukraine's sovereignty. It was an attempt to force Washington to take a harder stance, but the damage was already done. The United States of America had positioned itself in a way that was at best neutral and at worst leaning towards Moscow. Trump's rhetoric has only intensified. He's warned Zelenskyy that unless he negotiates peace quickly, he might not have a country left to lead. However, days before, Zelenskyy had already offered to give up his leadership in exchange for peace in his nation or for Ukraine to become a member of NATO. In the latest development, Trump stated in a media interaction that the Ukrainian leader will be in the US later this week to finalize a deal to end the war. Trump has even warned of World War III if the war continues to go on. In fact, in that very same media interaction, President Trump also confirmed that he will be meeting Russian President Putin at some point in time.
I don't think it's going to be much of a problem. I think once we settle, there's going to be no more war in Ukraine, and you're not going to have it. It's not going to be a very big problem. That's going to be the least of it. We're helping Ukraine like nobody's ever helped Ukraine before. And I can say this, if I didn't become president, Ukraine would right now still be at a level where there would be no even thinking about a peace. And it's a sad thing that this happened. This would have never happened, this war, if I were president. Zero chance. And I will say this also, it could lead to World War III if it's not solved. You know, there'll be a point at which it's not going to stop at those two countries. Already there's such involvement from other countries. And it could really lead to a very big war, World War III. And we're not going to let that happen either. But yeah, at some point I'll be meeting with President Putin too.
This aligns with Trump's broader worldview, one that prioritizes America's self-interest over traditional alliances. According to reports, sources inside the Trump administration suggest that his team is exploring ways to pressure Ukraine into a settlement, potentially by ending military aid. Some reports also indicate that Trump is considering recognizing Russia's annexation of certain territories in exchange for ceasefire. Such a move would be a major diplomatic victory for Putin and a crushing blow to Zelenskyy. Earlier, Zelenskyy also spoke about Trump's peace plan. Addressing the G7 countries, including US President Donald Trump, he reiterated that both Europe and Ukraine should be involved in the peace process.
And we need to meet as soon as possible to define the terms of peace and security guarantees. Our teams are already working productively with the U.S. on economic agreement, which we hope to sign in Washington. And President Trump, we would really like to hear from you, because all our people, all our families are very worried. Will there be support from America? Will America be the leader of the free world? And I want to be very honest with you. For our people, for life in general, it's so important that American support, American assistance remains. And really, I believe we can be just as effective in securing real guarantees for peace.
Ukraine also hosted European leaders on the 24th of February to mark 3 years of all-out war with Russia, while top US officials stayed away. A clear illustration of President Donald Trump's shift toward Moscow since returning to power. With Washington shifting gears, Europe is left in a precarious position. French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer have both reaffirmed their commitment to Ukraine. But without US backing, their ability to sustain military aid is limited. The European Union has been pushing for a stronger response, but internal divisions are making it difficult to present a united front. Meanwhile, Russia is capitalizing on the uncertainty. Moscow has intensified its attacks in eastern Ukraine, sensing an opportunity to push forward while Western support is in flux. Russia launched a record 267 drones into Ukraine on the 23rd of February, leaving Kyiv in big trouble amid peace talks. The Ukrainian Air Force reported that 138 drones were shot down across 13 regions, while 119 others failed to reach their targets. For Zelenskyy, the road ahead is uncertain. His approval ratings within Ukraine remain strong, but there are growing murmurs about the sustainability of the war. His government is facing economic strains, and calls for a diplomatic solution, once unthinkable, are now being openly discussed. The Ukrainian president has responded to Trump's comments with defiance, accusing the US president of living in a Russian-made disinformation space. But behind the strong words, there is a looming reality. Without continued Western support, particularly from the United States of America, Ukraine's ability to resist Russia may weaken. So is this the end for Zelenskyy? Not necessarily, but it is undoubtedly his toughest moment yet. The leader who once stood as a global symbol of resistance is now facing political isolation, a wavering support system, and an adversary who senses weakness. The next few months could determine Ukraine's fate and Zelenskyy's own political survival. As the world watches, one thing is clear: the narrative has shifted from hero to outcast. Zelenskyy's future now depends not just on his own resolve, but on whether the West, especially a Trump-led US, still believes in Ukraine's fight. The war may not be over, but for Zelenskyy, this could be endgame. Thank you for watching Statecraft.